Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Here for the Craic with me, Emma Neill. I hope you're all doing good. God, it feels like a long time since I've last spoken to you because obviously my last episode was a guest episode with my sister, which was really fun. We recorded that in London and I did hers as well. It was a big day of podcast recordings. My brain was completely fried by the end of it. And then I had the Be Creator Awards that night, which, by the way, I obviously didn't win, which I said in the last episode I wasn't going to win. But thank you so much to everyone that voted for me. And it was just like a huge honor to be there in the first place. So yeah, thank you so much. I had such a nice time in London because, so I was over for that. I was over for a couple of jobs, and then also my mum was running the half marathon on the Sunday. So we stayed till then, and usually in marathons, there's like an app you can download and you put in like the runner's number and then you can track them round the route. And we were like, okay, amazing. We will track her and we'll just follow her on a bike, on a line bike going around London, because line bikes are electric, so they're so easy to get around London because like you just don't need to put in any effort. And also London is quite, well, it depends where you go, but London, generally speaking, is quite cyclist friendly. I wish Belfast was more cyclist friendly because there's something so nice and freeing about just like being out in a city on a bike and traveling everywhere by bike. It's so nice. Now, I know we don't have as many dry days in the year as London, so you probably wouldn't have as much opportunity to cycle places, but yeah, I think it's something we're really lacking. And also because we're not like massively used to cyclists, then the drivers aren't great with cyclists, so it's actually quite dangerous, and not having proper cycle lanes and everything. So yeah, I don't tend to cycle when I'm in Belfast at all, really, which is such a shame because I have the most gorgeous bike. Like, see, when I was back in my like, you know, Tumblr obsessed days, do you remember that era where everyone had like the really cute bikes with the baskets in the front, and you'd see like the Tumblr pictures of people with their like bouquet of tulips in the bike basket? That was a bit of me. That was me to my core. And so I think for maybe like my 14th birthday or 13th birthday or something like that, I got the most stunning pink Claude Butler bike with a little basket in the front. And like, I wish I could cycle that thing everywhere because it is gorgeous. But like, yeah, it's not really so much a thing in Belfast, I guess. And I'd be scared to. And that's not even to mention the fact that you'd probably have to wear a helmet everywhere. And let's be real. Am I going to sacrifice the hair just to travel places by bike? Am I going to get helmet hair just for the sake of going on a little 10-minute cycle? Probably not. I'll be so real with you guys, probably not. But yeah, anyway, that was so fun tracking her around on the line bikes. And because it was a Sunday morning, London was quite quiet. Like, central London was so quiet. And also loads of the roads were blocked off for the marathon. So like, we were just cycling through with no cars on the road, like hair blowing in the wind on the line bikes, not having to worry about cars. It was a stunning experience. You know what? That is my peak of the week. God, I had some really great food while I was in London. I mean, I feel like I always do. I'm always trying to try new places every time I go to London because they're just so blessed with the selection and the diversity of different types of foods you can get. What did I try for the first time this time? I tried Iraqi food from a market stall, which was so fucking good. Tried some other different market foods. I tried a Palestinian restaurant that was really yummy, a place called Maramia. Yeah, every time I go to London, I make it my mission to like eat my way around the place, because why would not take advantage of that? Do you know, why not take advantage of being in the capital city that has like so much incredible food to offer? And look, Belfast food scene's good. Like, the quality of food is good, but we don't have that diversity. Yeah, not at all, not even close. So yeah, I just make it my mission every time I'm there to like try different things. Oh guys, my pit of this week, I don't know what the fuck is wrong with my skin. I swear I'm always coming on here and complaining about my skin. Like, it's just a never-ending cycle with me and my skin. Like, I really didn't think at the age of 26 I would still be dealing with this. This week I've been getting such bad under the skin spots. You know, like those really, really sore, deep under the skin ones that are like big cysts. And I used to get them all the time when I was a teenager, kind of like before I worked out that my skin wasn't reacting very well to dairy. That's like initially what made me give up dairy was that I correlated it to those kind of big cyst spots, and for the most part they did go away when I gave up dairy. Now every now and then I do get the odd one, but when I say the odd one, it would just be like, you know, very much one every now and again, maybe like hormone related, you know, if it was coming up to my period or something. They're not something I deal with frequently these days, and this week I got 4 of them. Like, what do you mean 4 on my face at one time? And they were like those really, really big ones, to the point that it actually, you know, when it changes the shape of your face. Like, do you ever get one and it's like on the corner of your chin, and then your chin just looks like a lopsided because of how big it is? And they never form a head, and you can't squeeze them. You just have to like deal with the pain. Oh, it was horrible. Now they're mostly gone. I'm still dealing with them a little bit, but they are mostly gone. I honestly was embarrassed to like leave the house for the last while. Well, when I say embarrassed to leave the house, like I could put makeup on and I was fine to leave, but like there's been other days I've meant to sit down and film this podcast, and like I just felt like I couldn't even touch my skin because it was so sore. Like, what the fuck? Why am I still dealing with this? I don't know what's triggered that. I can't work out what's triggered that, because nothing in my skincare routine's changed. Nothing in my diet has changed. Nothing in like my lifestyle has changed. I'm not overly stressed. I haven't got like a change of environment. I haven't like moved or anything like that. So I just don't really understand where it's coming from. And I'm really hoping that it's just like a one-off freak week for my skin and we can be done with that. My recommendation for this week is gonna be get a Thai massage. I've got 2 Thai massages within the last 2 weeks. It's the ultimate treat. It is literally the ultimate treat yourself experience. You know, for the likes of getting your nails done or getting any type of like, you know, treatment or procedure done that is okay, yes, it might like give you a lot of joy and you might like the way it looks, but it also kind of is a little bit for then how it looks to other people. A massage is like one thing that is actually purely for yourself. Like, you're the only person that enjoys and reaps the rewards of getting a massage. And look, massages are expensive. It's not something I do every week. It's not even something I do every month. I mean, when I came back from Vietnam, and because when you travel in Asia and the massages are cheaper, like I was taking advantage of that and getting them more often. And when I was doing that, I was like, I need to keep up this habit. When I come home, I need to, okay, yeah, I'm not going to be able to afford to get them every week, but it'd be nice to try and like make a conscious effort to try and get, you know, at least one a month or even one every other month or something like that. And like maybe get a pedicure on the alternative month. And it's just, I completely forgot about them. I fell out of the habit, and my sister took me to a Thai massage place when I was in London, and then I took my boyfriend to a Thai massage place in Belfast at the weekend, and stunning experience. Couldn't recommend it more. You feel incredible after. And actually at the one in Belfast, I did a yoga class in the morning, came home, got a shower, then did a Thai massage. The feeling of doing a yoga class followed by a Thai massage is unmatched. I felt like a literal, what do you call those little yellow men? The little stretchy yellow men. Do you know what I'm talking about? Those little toys. Fuck, what are they called? Anyway, I literally felt like one of those loosey-goosey yellow men. So yeah, that's my recommendation of the week. See, to get a good Thai massage, you don't have to go to the most expensive, bougie spa. Actually, in fact, a lot of the time, the more just like low-key, authentic, like run by Thai women places will be a way better massage. Okay, yeah, it might not be like really luxurious inside and all that, but it'll be cheaper and it'll probably be better. Okay, let's get into this week's podcast topic. So on this week's podcast, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of reading gap between men and women. Why it seems to be that women read a lot more fiction, and meanwhile men are a lot more reluctant to read fiction, and if they were to read it, they would kind of tend to opt for non-fiction. And I feel like it's all very telling of the landscape we're living in, with like, you know, all these male podcasters preaching about like hyper productivity and yeah, just really living in this like hustle culture, grind obsessed era. And I guess how that's like impacted what we do in our spare time, and also how I think that impacts us on an emotional level, on an empathy level, which I'm going to get into. This podcast was really inspired by an article I read on Dazed online, Dazed magazine online, by a girl called Georgina Elliott. It was called Why Don't Straight Men Read Novels? I will link the article in the description. I love that article so much. It really got me thinking. I actually messaged or emailed the writer of the article, Georgie, after reading it, and she very kindly sent me some of her research that she did on the topic as well, and the people that she interviewed and stuff, so that was cool. But yeah, shout out to you, Georgie, for inspiring this episode. So yeah, let's get into it. So in 2023, women made up 80% of the book buying market in the UK, US and Canada, and accounted for 65% of all fiction purchases in the UK. I don't know how they're tracking that. It's not like when you walk into Waterstones, they're like, and that was a female that bought that book. I don't know. Anyway, this is the statistic I'm reading. I will link everything in the description. But yeah, reading in general, it feels like a very female-dominated thing, a very female-led hobby. It doesn't feel like the norm to, for example, if you went on a date with a boy, if they turn around and told you that they were an avid reader, first of all, green flag, but second of all, it's not something you would expect. Like, if that feels like it would be an anomaly. Whereas, if I met a new girlfriend or I was like having conversations amongst a group of girls, I think it would be the anomaly if you didn't read. So it's like very much normalized within like, female conversation and our lives and our culture that this is like such a big hobby amongst us, whereas I don't feel like men discuss in that same way. They don't like engage with books like that and like talk amongst their friends about good books they read or tell them about like how this related to them. And this is another thing, is the conversation gap between men and women, and this is actually something I'm going to get into later on in the episode. But yeah, there is like very evidently a gap there. And as with anything in life, that usually stems from like quite a while back, these learned behaviors. It's not just a this generation thing. This is like from over time. And I guess like back in the day, maybe when women weren't allowed to work and they were very much kind of seen as like your role was to be like a housewife and to do everything in the home and not leave the house and maybe just like socialize amongst your other female friends, but like anything outside of that was like, kind of frowned upon. And I guess in that sense, you maybe were given more liberties to do things with your spare time that didn't have to revolve around money. Does that make sense? Because everything we do now is kind of like, there's this pressure to like monetize off of everything. If you have a hobby, if you have something you're really passionate about, if you're particularly interested in something, like, is there a way you can monetize off of that? Is there a way you can make that your business or your side hustle? Or if you're really into travel, can you start doing travel ebooks? It's like everyone's always looking for this way that you can like optimize your time and like basically get more financial gain and more financial success in any way, shape or form. And I think because back in the day, women didn't have that pressure because they actually weren't legally allowed to work. Now, it sounds like I'm saying this in like a good way that that they were allowed to do this, but it's not at all. Like, obviously, we need autonomy over what we do with our time, and the fact that we're able to work is undoubtedly a way better place to be in. However, I think with that not being able to work, you were maybe allowed more liberty in terms of like, just being able to spend some time engaging in hobbies and things that didn't necessarily have to ever like have any financial gain or any prospect of like being of monetary value, because you were allowed to just spend your time doing things that you enjoy and that didn't have to have like this immediate sense of like, oh, I've learned so much about this one thing, now I can use that to do this. Do you know what I mean? There was just kind of a bit more room for women to do that because they actually couldn't legally go out and make the money. Whereas for males back then, it was like, if you were seen to be reading, it was like you were wasting your time. It was as if you weren't of value to society, because if you're better off sitting there reading and doing something that you're just enjoying that doesn't actually benefit anyone in the family or yourself or whatever, then it's like you're a bit not worthless, but like, could you not be doing something better with that time? I guess just over generations, it's like trickled down to the point that like it just is more of a female dominated thing. It's more normalized, like, you know, in the same way that I always talk about this example for like learned behaviors within the family and like gender roles within the family. If your brothers, for example, don't see your dad doing any housework, you know, helping out at all in the house, whether that be emptying the dishwasher, hoovering the floors, like no matter what it is, doing the washing. If your brothers don't see your dad doing that, like how likely are they to also then copy it? You know, you have to learn these behaviors and learn that that is something that you should do. And if you never see a male in your life, a male that you look up to doing that thing, you're way less likely to engage in that thing. And that's why, you know, if little boys grow up having never seen their dad do any housework, what makes you think they're suddenly just going to start picking that up and doing that of their own accord? No, in their head, whether it be subconscious or not, they're thinking, that's not my job as a man. Do you know what I mean? And so it's the same with reading. It's like, you know, little girls, they see their mums reading more. They see them reading more on holidays. They see them reading more in everyday life. They see them talking to their friends about books. They see them being part of book clubs. And they just see their mums being a lot more interested in books versus their dads. They might not see reading ever, or maybe like the odd book on holiday. So therefore, it's less of a learned behavior amongst the boys. And then you have this kind of like, you know, snowball effect where does that ever change? Okay, yes, there might be the odd boy that like really gets into reading for whatever reason, just of their own accord, because they end up deciding they really like it whether their dad does or not. But you're less encouraged to if you don't see the people that you look up to doing that thing. And so a lot of men don't see males in their lives reading, and maybe if they did like reading when they were younger, then they'll try and talk to other males about it, and it doesn't necessarily get met with like, okay, yeah, it might not be met like massively negatively. They might not get bullied for reading, although that does happen in some cases, but they're not met with the same like, you know, excitement, the same engagement from their peers as maybe other girls do. Like I remember, for example, when I was growing up and like me and all of the girls I was friends with all reading our Jacqueline Wilson books and like coming into school and talking about them, and you don't see that amongst the boys. Like they're just not, they're talking about different things. I mean, sometimes I really do wonder what boys talk about outside of sport, but that's a whole other debate. But yeah, I think in general, a lot of men do find reading fiction a waste of time. And it's really weird to me because I don't understand why you would find it a waste of time to read fiction, but then so many men are like really into movies, which are obviously fictional. So like, why one and not the other? I think for a lot of years there, I don't know if anyone else feels the same. I don't know if it was culturally for a few years or if it was more just like me within my generation and everyone goes through that period when they're also growing up. But I feel like for some time reading was really uncool, and it was kind of like, maybe this happens to everyone. It's like, you know, you leave primary school, you go into secondary school, and then you start to just like have to read the worst books ever, you know, when you have to like study different books for English lessons and things. And I think it puts everyone off reading for a while. Don't get me wrong, there's always going to be those people that love reading throughout their whole lives, and having to study those books never put them off reading. They were able to like separate those two things and see reading the books for those classes as just something you have to do for school versus, you know, being able to read. And to be honest, I never like fully went off reading. Like I was still always an avid reader on holidays, and when like big things would come out that would be very kind of relevant amongst your group, you know, like I remember when the Hunger Games came out and we were all obsessed with it, things like that. But I wasn't like an all year round reader, you know, I wasn't like getting through books on books every single year. But there definitely is this kind of period of time where you're forced to read these books for school, and everyone kind of falls out of love with it a little bit, and therefore it kind of starts to become a little bit uncool. You know, it goes from like everyone being such avid readers in primary school and showing off about how many books they can read in the space of a week to it being like a bit loserish to be bringing your book into school. And when I say that, I don't mean that you were a loser if you brought your book into school, not at all, but like, you know what I mean? You know what little kids are like at the time, and it became a little bit uncool, basically. And I think I didn't pick it up again until after I left school and like rediscovered my love for reading. And I think loads of boys just don't ever rediscover their love for reading that they maybe once had in primary school because of so many different reasons, as I've said, with not seeing like their peers or male roles that they look up to reading, but also this like very grind obsessed hustle culture that we live in. Like now more than ever, we're seeing the likes of Andrew Tate, Andrew Huberman. I'm not actually putting them two people in the same category because I know they're very different, but we're gonna for now speak about them within the same category. Who else? Like Diary of a CEO, like all these like male podcasters, these influential male people, that's a good one. All these influential males that are so obsessed with like self-optimization, productivity, making good use of your time, always having like productive outcomes from things, always having to have like key takeaways, key learnings, key improvements. Like we're really obsessed, and that kind of like space, that podcast space specifically, is very obsessed with practical outcomes. And I think reading fictional books doesn't necessarily have an immediate practical outcome. And I think as a result of that, a lot of males are kind of just not interested in reading. They don't see that as good use of their time. And if they were to sit down and dedicate half an hour a day to reading, it would have to be something of real importance and would have to make real good use of their time and would have to be teaching them about the fucking, what do you even call it, stocks and shares market, so that they could go and invest, or it would have to be teaching them about their health so they can like self-optimize. And do you know what I mean? It's like they need these like key takeaways and be able to like actually do something after that book. And that's not to say that reading fiction isn't beneficial, and I'm going to get into why I think reading fiction books is actually so essential and how I think as a society we would benefit from everyone reading fiction books. But it's definitely not an immediate like, oh, these are the steps I now have to do and implement into my life in order to be able to do this. It's a lot more passive, the benefits that come from reading fictional books. I thought this quote was really interesting. I'm going to read it word for word. It's from the article, so if you do go and click on the article, you'll see this. But I just thought this perspective on it was actually really interesting, and I never would have thought about it like this. But anyway, okay, so she says, meanwhile, masculinity continues to be in crisis. Men between the ages of 18 and 34 feel the most pressure of any generation to conform to masculine behaviours. In the absence of a positive blueprint of how to exist in the post-Me Too world, a community of podcasting manfluencers, including ex-Navy SEALs Jocko Willink and David Goggins, and neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman, have rushed in to promote their idea of what masculinity should look like. Self-improvement, ambition, and growth mindsets are the banner messaging of this male-coded media world, where Andrew Tate reigns supreme, and the aim of the game is to optimize every waking moment to become a financially successful Sigma. Doubtless, many men enjoy the fact that reading non-fiction gives them an excuse to peacock their newfound knowledge and mansplain their latest read to their next hinge date too. I thought this was such an interesting take because it's so true that, you know, after the Me Too movement, it was as if this picture of what it was to be masculine and what it was to be a man and all these like traits of like toxic masculinity just completely shattered. But then it was like, but now what? Like, now what is masculine? Now what is masculinity? And if it's not like being this macho male and like, you know, being all those like very stereotypically negative things associated with being like very masculine, and I guess everything that came with that, and that was uncovered from the Me Too movement. And it was just like, but then what is being a male? And all these kind of like male podcasters and male people in that like social media space have come forward and been like, this is what it is to be a male, is to be financially successful and to be into your health and be self-optimizing and independent. And look, I'm not saying that any of those things aren't good. And well, sorry, actually, I fucking despise Andrew Tate, and as should everyone listening to this. I'm not saying that those things aren't good. I think self-optimization and looking after your health and valuing productivity are all really amazing things. And they're things I talk about on this podcast as well. Like, you know me, I'm really into my health and fitness. I'm into routines and things I know are going to benefit my health and well-being. And I do like to talk about that. And I think there's something to be said massively for productivity, because the aim is to be, when you're working, as productive as possible, so that for me it doesn't bleed into my whole day. So I do have my time to rest and recuperate and do things I enjoy. And I think, you know, being productive in the times that you're set out to do certain things is like one of the most beneficial things you can do for yourself, because you're then allowing yourself more time to do the other things. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but it's like, you know, if I designate myself an hour to sit down and read a book, I want to be productive in reading that book. I don't want to haphazardly read it, but meanwhile, like jumping onto my phone, meanwhile getting distracted doing something else. Like, you know, I want to dedicate that time to reading the book, because then what, at the end of the hour, if I've actually only read 10 pages and I'm like, that was a waste of time. Like, you don't want to feel like you're constantly wasting your time by not being productive within the time frame you're dedicating to things. And so I'm not sitting here like slamming any of these ideas, but I just think that that kind of masculine space, that male podcasting space, has become very overrun by this like toxic hyper productivity narrative and this kind of need for constant self-optimization that doesn't allow any room for just like resting, recuperating, enjoying a fictional novel. Do you know what I mean? And those things are equally as important in my life, in my brain, as like the rest of it. Like I think without those things, without rest and recuperation and doing things that you enjoy just for you and not for any kind of greater outcome, they're equally as important as the other things that you do in life, because it's all about balance. And like, what is one of those things without the other? Do you know what I mean? You have to be able to switch off. You have to have time for hobbies that is solely for yourself and not for any other greater purpose. But I think that space of male podcasters and influencers don't really discuss that. Okay, so you might be wondering, but why? Like, if men don't want to read fictional books, why should they? Because you shouldn't have to force anyone to do anything. And yeah, completely agree. But I personally think reading fictional books could not be more beneficial to you as a person and us as a society. And the reason I think that is because there's nothing else that puts you in the shoes of someone else like a fictional book. Now, okay, yes, there's the argument that you can do the same via a movie or via even a documentary that like puts you in the shoes of someone else. And I agree, yeah, you can, I guess, do that in a way. However, not to the same degree. The experience you get from reading a fictional book where you're fully immersed in someone else's narrative is like no other. And that's because you're reading a story over the course of, I mean, I guess you could smash it out in a day. Usually you're reading a story over the course of like a month, let's say, and you're really taking the time with this book to get into the headspace of the character and to really understand them. And what you get from that you don't get in the likes of a movie is like their thoughts and their inner feelings on certain things. You know, when like you're reading something and the character's having a conversation with another character, and not only are you reading what that person's saying, but you're also reading what they're thinking, because they're kind of narrating to the reader what they're thinking as well as what they're outwardly saying. And yes, you might pick up on some of those cues in movies, for example, but it's not as obvious, and not everyone is as good as picking up on those cues as others. So, you know, what you picked up on might be completely different to what someone else picks up on, just because they might be a little bit more empathetic, or they might, for some reason, just like understand the situation a bit better. Do you know what I mean? Everyone is like coming at these things from different life experiences, and people pick up on different things. And so when you watch a movie, say, of the exact same story, there could be times where things are open to interpretation. So you don't always get that like feeling where you really understand what was going inside the character's head, because you're not outwardly told. And there's so many books I've read, so many fictional books I've read that have really made me think of things that I would have never thought of. You know, they've really put me in the shoe of someone that couldn't be further away from me in terms of, okay, yes, maybe physically, like what country they live in, but also just like their life experiences as a person. And I would never get that insight into someone, and so deeply as well into their mind, without having read that book. And therefore, the knowledge that gives me, the perspective that gives me, and the ability that then also gives me to like take that perspective on board and critically engage with something differently when I next see it. And sorry, that was a lot, but what I mean by that is, say for example, I have just read a really good fictional book that the main character, the narrator, the person that it's told from the perspective of, was a Black woman living in Nigeria, okay? And I might have learned all these things through this character that I would have never learned had I have not read the book. And then the next time I see something on the news that's to do with, I don't know, a Black Nigerian woman, I therefore mentally, critically engage with that piece of news a lot more differently than what I would have had I have not read the book. And that's just one example of how reading fiction books can just like open your perspective in so many different ways. And actually, this is the same reason why I say it is so important to diversify what you consume across the board. And what I mean by that is not just in terms of the books you read, the fictional books you read, also the non-fiction books you read, also the podcasts you enjoy, the films you watch, the series you like, the people you follow on Instagram, the people you follow on TikTok, the people you're subscribed to on YouTube, the newspapers you buy, the magazines you buy. It is so important to diversify everything that you consume. If you're only getting media from like a very, very small kind of genre of people, shall we say, it's never gonna open you up to anyone else's perspective and allow you to actually like gain perspective on anything. You're just gonna always live in this little bubble where everything is just very like insular and everyone believes the same thing. You know, this big echo chamber, as I always talk about on social media, this echo chamber that the algorithm loves to create for everyone. And the issue is that, you know, on the likes of TikTok and stuff, that will become, the echo chamber becomes such a thing because of the algorithm, whereas you can actually actively choose to just read a different book that's like from the perspective of someone very different to you. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, yes, you can't choose what comes up next on your For You page, but you actually can pick, okay, you know what, the next book I read is going to be about a young autistic boy or something like along those lines. Like I read a book that was written by a boy that had autism, and again, an amazing insight into the world of a really young autistic boy that felt so misunderstood by his family, and gave me such a good perspective on something that you don't really, like, from the perspective of someone you don't really hear from often. Like, you don't hear from autistic kids very often, and I've been able to recommend that book to so many people. And like had a conversation recently with someone who was the parent of someone who has an autistic child, and was able to recommend that book and say, no, like, honestly, I know your child can't communicate these things to you right now, but like, I think it would be such an amazing read. And like, even just little things like that, like, it's so, anyway, I've gone down a whole spiral here to say about how important I think it is to diversify the media that you consume. But I think reading fiction books does that to a degree that is like on a whole other level, you know, where you might watch an hour-and-a-half movie about something, you're taking a month to read for hours upon hours on this person within this book, and also gaining a way deeper understanding of them, as I said. And I personally think that having that widened perspective is what gives you empathy. It's what allows you to put yourself in other people's shoes and have empathy for people that aren't like you. You know, let's take immigrants, for example. If all you see about immigrants is just negative media headlines, negative stereotypes, negative stories about, like the British media are so bad for it, about the only thing they ever talk about to do with immigrants is when like they make news headlines for like a crime someone committed and they have to throw it in there that someone was an immigrant. You know what I mean? And if that's all you ever see of immigrants, no fucking wonder you're going to have a bad perspective of someone that's an immigrant. Like you need to actively take that upon yourself to widen your perspective and put yourself in the shoes of someone who actually is an immigrant and be able to empathize with them human to human. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you do like make a conscious effort to do so, because you just keeping reading those negative headlines isn't going to help the narrative, and it's only going to make them seem less and less human to you. And like, it's really baffling to me as someone who is very empathetic that people can't actually just see those headlines for what they are and aren't able to just see ultimately like everyone is human and you should be able to empathize with everyone, whether they look like you or not. But unfortunately, not everyone thinks that way. And so, yeah, that's just an example of like why I think putting yourself in the shoes of someone else via maybe a fiction book can be so beneficial for empathizing. And look, this isn't based on any statistics, but I don't think it's a coincidence that men are generally less empathetic and also read less fiction. I mean, if there's any studies out there that anyone wants to point me to, please be my guest. Reading opens up your eyes to other people's experiences, and so many men will never understand other people's experiences. Like, white men will never truly understand what it's like to exist as a black woman, for example, but the only way they can try to is by reading fictional books. And like, it's so fucked that like political leaders can't empathize with certain people in our society because they actually don't know how to like put themselves in the shoes of those people. And I honestly think if everyone just read a fucking fictional book No, because it's actually so much deeper of a problem though, because it's not about just reading one book. Like, it's actually so like built into our culture now that it's not a man's thing. So it's going to take a lot more than a couple of political leaders reading some books. And I understand that. But I do think as a society, like as a whole, we would all benefit hugely from men just in general reading more fiction. Fiction books have this way of like teaching you things without it being like a straight up kind of told fact, you know? Obviously, it's not a non-fiction book that's like telling you the history of this and that, but you can like very passively learn things from fiction books. Like, they have a way of like teaching you things that's just kind of entangled into the story. And as a result of like reading the story, you therefore learn that thing. And I think that's like one of the best ways to learn, because sometimes when you're just told facts and you're going through a book and like underlining or highlighting things you find interesting or whatever, you won't necessarily hold on to that information. But when it's told in a way where it's within a story, I think you're way less likely to hold on to that and to take that with you and compartmentalize it. And also then, like, as I said, be able to critically engage with things and think, oh, actually, this is what happened when, you know what I mean? Like, you're a lot more likely to hold on to something when it's more attached to a memory or a story that you have about that thing, as opposed to just like a paragraph that you read on, do you know what I mean? I'm trying to think of an example of this, but I really can't right now. There's a so-called conversation gap between men and women, which, I mean, it's a bit of a theory, but I think anyone listening to this will probably agree with the theory. There is a huge conversation gap between men and women. Men and women do not converse in the same way. Let's be real with ourselves. You take a girl group and compare their conversations to the equivalent male group, it's gonna be very different. And it's very apparent when, say, you're single and you're going on dates. The things that you talk about on dates can obviously differ so much across the board depending on who it is you're on a date with. But like, in general, men aren't great conversationalists. They are good at like making jokes, stating facts, mansplaining, positioning themselves in a certain way, making them out to be like, you know, the way they want you to think that they are, if that makes sense. Whereas women, we're a lot better at like finding common ground, finding common interests, relating to people. We just do converse in very, very different ways. And I do think part of that stems from this like ability to be empathetic towards people and to therefore like engage with them differently. And, you know, as I said, be able to find common ground. That's like, I guess in a way, a trait of empathy, or like something that comes from being an empathetic person, is like being able to find that kind of like mutual understanding with someone and that relatability with someone. And I guess, again, I don't think there's any like coincidence there why men don't act in that same way. And again, it's a deeper problem. It's not just about not reading fiction books. Like, it's also about, you know, who they've looked up to and men they see in the media and all of that. Like, it's a way bigger thing. But does reading fiction make us better conversationalists as well? I don't know. Or is that just something that's been ingrained in us from younger, you know? Like, women are yappers. And so we've just like taught ourselves to be good at that from a young age. I do think a level of like empathy does come into that though. And I think men generally like know people will listen to them. So they kind of have this, how would you say, this self-assurance where, you know, if I'm speaking within a group or if I'm having a conversation with someone, if I'm in a room of important people, like I will be listened to when I say this. Whereas women, like, we can be quite self-doubting and we're like constantly observing ourselves from the outside as well. Like, we're observing how other people are observing us, and we kind of recognize that we won't always be listened to in the same way that men will, and therefore I think we're less like wanting to be like dominant in a conversation and more wanting to like be relatable, if that makes sense. How does that even link to what I was speaking about before? Oh, because I was saying about how we differ so much conversationally and whether I think that's linked to yeah, I honestly do think, like, I think there's so many things that influence this, but I do actually think that like empathy and reading fiction are big factors in this. And that's not to say that if everyone just started reading fiction books, all the problems in the world would come to an end. Absolutely not. However, I think we'd really benefit from it. And I think that like male political leaders, seriously, well, first of all, I don't understand how these like rich white male political leaders are being voted into that place in the first place. Like, these people don't know how to relate to like, you know, working class people. They don't know how to relate to immigrants. They don't know how to relate to women going through issues when it comes to like their reproductive rights. Like, these like rich white males, they don't know how to relate to these people, and they're not making an effort to try and relate to those people. Like, they're not even trying to empathize with those people. And so the fact that they're in these positions of power in the first place, it's a bit fucked up. I don't know how they're getting there. I mean, people are voting for them, clearly. But yeah, I think it'd be pretty safe to say, like, if countries were all run by women, we'd probably live in like such a way more empathetic society that really like cared about its population, because we all read fiction books. That's what it all comes down to. No, it actually doesn't, but that's kind of my point, I guess, at the end of this podcast. So yeah, I guess we'll leave it there for this week's episode. I feel like I had so much I wanted to say for this episode, but my brain's a little bit all over the place, so I do apologize for that. I don't know what's wrong with me today. I just can't seem to get a sentence in order, but I hope this made sense to you guys. Oh, while we're talking about fiction books, I'm currently reading Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. It's my book club book for this month. I'm actually loving it so far. I'm not that far into it, but I am really loving it. If you're not a part of the book club, make sure to go join it. It's just on my Instagram. It's like a broadcast channel. And I think I'm going to have a little book club meetup event. So if you live in Belfast and you want to come to that, keep an eye out. I'm hoping to have it. If not by the end of this month, then maybe the start of next month. So yeah, anyway, I love you guys loads. Make sure to rate and review the podcast, subscribe on YouTube, and I will speak to you guys in next week's episode. Bye!